I think we see a lot of ebbs and flows in the design and construction industry. It's really easy to say niche and focus until you get into like really lean times. When all of a sudden there isn't a lot of work out there, then that's where we tend to see people start to stray. The highest performing companies that I see, the ones that have been really, really successful over time, they really know what to say no to, even in those lean times. And I've always said, I think you say a whole lot more about yourself and your company by what you say no to than what you say yes to, because saying yes is pretty easy. Saying no when there's not a lot of work out there, that's a lot tougher.
Aaron, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I'd love to hand it straight to you. Why don't you do a little introduction to yourself and tell the world who you are?
Yeah, Aaron Henderson, Stack Construction Technologies. We're kind of an end-to-end platform, primarily focused on trade subcontractors. So huge industry in construction, kind of my whole background. Spent a lot of time consulting with architects, engineers, contractors all over the world. And more recently, I've moved over to the technology side. So it's been fun to bring kind of some of that business background into the technology side to kind of tie together some of the business problems these guys face with technology that can kind of help them. So that's me.
Awesome. Well, tell me, I'm curious because that's a pretty big leap to go from being in the more traditional construction space. And I don't know what your role was there because even that, like you can say I was in the construction industry, but like that's a big space. There's lots of different hats. I was literally having dinner with a friend of mine who's now retired, and he was in the construction space for 40 years, right? And I was like, well, what was your first job? And he goes, I was literally the guy responsible for being up on the high rises aligning the steel, right? And so that too, him being an executive in Turner or something like that. So so tell me, what was your role in that world? And then I would love to jump to what has it been like to transition into technology. But let's first talk about what your role was or what your experience was.
Yeah, so it was really cool. I came out of school. I actually had a business management degree, a construction management degree. Never really actually thought that the two would totally align, but interestingly enough, was able to get connected up with a consulting firm that focused, one of a few consulting firms that focused primarily on the AEC industry, so architects, engineers, and contractors.
Yeah.
So the first part of my career, probably the first decade, really was working with these folks, and it was everything from relatively small firms up to some of the largest in the industry. But it was really around primarily like strategy and operational efficiency. So a lot of these folks, even the biggest companies, came out, and a lot of times it might have been a second generation, third generation type company where these guys grew up in the trade, swinging hammers. They understood the trade really well, but maybe didn't understand kind of the business side behind it as much. And my personal passion with the two degrees, especially, was kind of the business side of it. So it was really cool. I got to work with these guys of everything from really high end strategy of mission and vision and values and those types of things, clear down to kind of how we execute and can be more efficient actually on a job site. So.
I was joking with a friend recently because we've, as you know, we've been kind of focused into this AEC space, and what I've been so surprised of it is like I want to meet a company that's less than 100 years old.
Yeah,
like it's incredible to me how many of either our clients or the folks that we've been talking to, or even the small firms, that it's like, it was my great grandfathers or whatever. It's been passed down through the generations. Which name another industry that can say that at that volume.
No, it's pretty remarkable. And as much as I think, like to think that we're advancing and stuff, there's a lot of our, I think our mindset and stuff that maybe goes back to some of those early days. So
it's still 100 years old.
Yeah. In some ways, like I say, we're definitely moving a little bit and changing some things, but definitely maybe some old school thought out there still.
We'll go into that a little bit. So before we jump over to Stack and kind of learning what that transition to technology has been like, tell me a little bit of what were some of the things when you were consulting with those firms and you were looking at companies that have been around for a long time, or you were looking at companies that are trying to figure out how do we be more efficient? How do we operationalize this? And also, how do we know where we're going? When the reality is we're lucky to get the next job. We execute on the job well. We hope that, errors in more jobs. What were some of the things that you found as common themes across those firms that you were able to address?
Yeah, I think some of the earliest things were kind of to your point. I mean, people were really good at doing work, and they just kind of assumed that whatever work they were doing, if they did a good job, it would lead to the next project. And I think that's kind of, a little bit of the, where the industry comes from, especially when things are kind of more local, regional. That works really well. I think one of the biggest things we found was that a lot of times, you build a school, so now you can build, a manufacturing facility, so now you can, and people were kind of spreading themselves thin. They were going in a lot of different areas. And there wasn't as much when I first kind of got into it, this idea of like specializing and people really kind of being known for certain things. And so a lot of the work that we did was try to help companies understand where they performed really, really well, and
Mhm.
grow that like a specific niche or a specific market. So we worked with, I think of like architects in particular, where we had an architect that was really great, really understood how education worked, and the education system had built a lot of schools. And so we really kind of helped them home message and focus in. And so now, instead of just being this local sort of jack of all trades, we took that message and they were able to go nationally, where they're able to help schools and go into even higher education and some of those kinds of things. So a lot of it was really understanding them, what was kind of their core, what they did really great, and then being able to sort of craft this strategy behind it of helping them get into more markets that reflected what they were good at. Was a big deal.
Oh, I think that's huge. We run into that. I mean, even there's a lot of parallels in my mind with the software industry as there is
Yeah.
with the construction industry, because I mean, in some ways, we're all service companies trying to figure out how to get another client, build those relationships, deliver on our services, make sure we're hitting the results, et cetera.
Right.
And so we feel a lot of those same pain points. And people always say niche, 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 right?
Hmm.
Uh,
Yep.
because you can have a specialty and expertise, be famous for something. And honestly, a lot of the firms that we're talking to now, albeit some of them are like, billion-dollar enterprise
Yeah.
services firms. And so they might have divisions, but in
Hmm.
general, they have
Yeah.
really started to say, we're gonna shut off that division, or we're gonna shut off
Yeah.
this division, and we're gonna go to where the money is, where the opportunity is, where the expertise is. Several of them are chasing data right now, right? Building like
Mhm.
data warehousing to building
Yeah.
energy resourcing for data warehousing, all these types of things. Um, that's a pretty common thing to niche down, albeit, man, it's really hard because you make hay where the sun shines. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yep, very common term in the industry for sure. And I think, it's really tough. I think some industries may be easier to focus than others. I think we see a lot of ebbs and flows in the design and construction industry. And so it's really easy to say niche and focus until you get into like really lean times. And it's when all of a sudden there isn't a lot of work out there, then that's where we tend to see people start to stray. So I think the highest performing companies that I see, the ones that have been really, really successful over time, they really know what to say no to, even in those lean times. And I've always said, I think you say a whole lot more about yourself and your company by what you say no to than what you say yes to. Because saying yes is pretty easy. Saying no when there's not a lot of work out there, that's a lot tougher. So
I'm totally guilty of that, and it is really really difficult. Okay, so let's talk about your transition. So
yeah,
you decided to kind of step out of the consulting world, or in this more specifically
yeah,
construction space, into technology, but still
yeah,
technology is definitely serving that space. So what
it
was
is.
the impetus that that transition, and also what has that transition been like?
Yeah, yeah. No, kind of an interesting transition. So, one was, so within the consulting firm that I was working for, one of the biggest sort of trends in consulting at the time was this idea of trying to move consulting out of just being a service. And a lot of consulting firms were trying to figure out how to sort of apply technology themselves
Yeah,
and build more of like a product offering. And so, one of the projects I actually worked on for my firm was building out kind of a goal management system for a lot of our customers. So we would go in, we would build mission, vision, values, get to these big strategic objectives, and then we'd have these sort of tactics and things we were trying to track or milestones that we had. So we actually built an in-house product that we used and rolled out to a number of our clients, and so got really excited behind the technology there. I think the other side of it was, though, part of our strategy for a lot of our customers was helping them find technologies that made them more successful. Because a lot of times the biggest thing that we could do was help them to implement technologies or find technologies that could be kind of the backbone of the company. or set maybe even like some parameters or guide rails for how the company operated. So we spent a lot of time doing that, which, between those two things, I think made it a pretty easy transition. So I was really fortunate, probably about 6, 7 years ago, maybe a little longer at this point. I got connected with a project management software, CEO of a project management software company in our space, and ultimately ended up coming over and leveraging some of my consulting background and industry ties to help them grow that. So that was kind of my entry into what we call contech or construction technology.
Yeah.
And kind of took that. We were really fortunate. We grew that company really quickly. We actually were able to exit that, and then a few years ago, I was able to come over to Stack and continue to kind of grow what they're doing here, which is great too.
Well, tell me, what are some of the common things? So a lot of people don't know. Construction is one of those funny things where it's all around us, and
Mm-hmm.
unless you're in that space, it's
Yeah.
one of those things where I don't know how that building or got built. I don't know how that school got built. I don't know how that multi-unit, like massive property sleeps like theirs are everywhere right now, how
Yeah.
those got built. I just know that they're there. I use them. I go to them. I'm waiting
Mm-hmm.
for them. They cause a mess while they're around. But
Yeah. Yeah.
tell me a little bit about what are some of the things that contact or construction tech or AC
Yeah.
tech
Yeah.
has been addressing, or that you found technology really was not just one of those like novelty things that was nice to have, but actually really started to change the way the work was getting done.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most unique things about construction compared to a lot of other industries is the number of stakeholders that are involved in any particular job. So, if you think of manufacturing, in manufacturing, you may have a handful of vendors, but you kind of have this, sort of standardized, streamlined sort of process that you follow, and you have certain people that you work with regularly. In construction, every project is unique and different, and there are different stakeholders on each job. You're working with new teams all the time. And so there are just a number of different people, from owners to architects to engineers to general contractors to trade contractors. We just have all these different stakeholders who are involved and evolving all the time, changing all the time. So while if you own the whole process kind of end to end, the whole value chain, it's one thing for you to sort of implement and embed your technologies or do things that you
Hmm.
want to do the way you want to do it. I think for construction, you now have all these sort of disconnected systems and processes that, while the general contractor may want to use this system, you have trade contractors and engineers and architects that want to use their own systems. So I think one of the biggest challenges that we've kind of faced as an industry has just been, how we bring all of these things together. We can't just standardize on one thing. And I think we've generally seen productivity in construction hasn't really kept up with a lot of other industries that are out there. I think that's a lot of it. I do think we start to see some of that sort of come full circle, or we're catching up, but it's definitely an area that's still playing a little bit of catch up.
Well, and there's definitely the big players in this space, the kind of ones that own certain parts of it, whether it's Autodesk or Procore or these types of
Right.
things that kind of
Yeah.
have this like lion share that what almost feels like a monopoly on the
Yeah.
industry. But then
Yeah.
there's these smaller organizations that are hitting these unique value props, maybe
Mhm.
approaching it in different ways.
Yeah.
Who I guess maybe it's what Stack is doing or what you're
Mhm.
seeing or others are doing. Who are you watching that you're going, oh, they're taking an interesting approach to this, in a space that you said is catching up, but also starting to get mature, starting to see the opportunity for it. And again, you got so many people involved.
Mhm.
Who's doing interesting work right now, or maybe what's being done that's interesting is maybe a better way to ask it.
I think it is interesting because we're playing so much catch up. Honestly, the most interesting thing for a long time was just simply us sort of getting up to speed with everything that was happening. So, even with some of the biggest firms that we work with, there's a lot of things that were still done by like pen and paper and those kinds of things.
Yeah,
So, a lot of it was just simple like project management. You mentioned Procore and some of those guys. So, I think we uh, those are kind of at least starting to become the standard where people actually have a project management system. I think this idea of moving from these like point solutions to kind of cohesive end-to-end solutions has started to be a
hmm,
bigger and bigger deal. um, I think we see probably the most innovation in the industry come from maybe some of the smaller like early stage tech companies
yeah,
where they're starting to bring in new technologies. Like we've gotten this far without saying AI, but some of the things that are starting to happen with AI and some of those kinds of things are starting to push stuff faster. The other one that's a really big deal for us is the idea of like building modeling. And so, Autodesk is doing a lot with building modeling and some of those
Yep.
kinds of things. It's been something that even in my time in the industry, I'm going on 20 years in the industry, and every year we've talked about that these models are. This is the year for models, and feels like we're getting closer to that here 20 years later than we are, but we're starting to move with some of this to where if we can work from kind of standardized models or certain things, then all of us can kind of start to see a project even maybe before the project actually gets built. So some really cool things with like visualization, and like actually leveraging models to walk job sites before you're actually building the physical building. So some kind
Getting
of
into
cool.
digital twins and AR and all
Yeah,
these things that
yeah,
really can help us make better decisions
exactly.
earlier rather than
Yeah.
making expensive decisions on site, right?
That's exactly it. It's a huge thing for us for sure. Yeah.
Well, tell me, and the audience as well, talk a little bit about what Stack does. What's
Yeah.
kind of your unique value prop in the world, and how do you approach it?
Yeah, kind of to the point you just made. So with construction, the earlier that you can make decisions and changes, the better, right? Because you're not having to reconstruct something out in the field. So that's really what Stack is heavily focused on. So we started as a pre-construction platform. So we help contractors, architects, and engineers early in the project to better understand the project, review blueprints, see what they're doing, estimate the project so they can come up with their budgets and have an idea of what they're
Mhm.
doing. And then we actually have products that allow us to push all of that out to the field so that as we execute on that project, we're able to kind of track and see what's happening with that project throughout. So we spend a lot of time in that pre-construction phase, just trying to make sure that we lay the groundwork to make sure the project is as successful as we can early on. We have some statistics and things that say, if you fix it in pre-construction, there's almost no change to the cost of the project. But if you do it once it's out in the field, it could be a 10x cost
Golly.
addition. So yeah, it can get really costly if we have to go out and tear out work that we've already done and bring crews back out to a job and things like that. So
That is where technology and construction is a little bit different. There's tech debt and there's tech rework when we think about rewriting code, but
yeah,
we can usually redeploy in a
yeah,
course of a day or so, not in the course
yeah.
of weeks or months. Yeah.
I've never thought of our technical debt in the field. I like that. I think that's, yeah. If we looked at it that way, it'd probably be not a bad way to approach it. So
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, I'm curious, what are some of the areas that you are when whether it's through Stack or through your own point of view,
yeah,
where are areas that you think, man, the construction industry, we are catching up, right?
yeah,
We're getting there to where we're better project management, better data visual, or better site visualization, better pre-construction management and estimations.
yeah,
Where are there still gaps? Where are the areas that you think, man, we need to close this gap where there's still opportunity here with the
yeah.
tools, with the space that we could be doing better.
Yeah, I think as much as I just talked about the models and the we're kind of early days of that. I think the better job that we can do to understand projects before we really get into them, I think that's a big
Mm.
deal. We start to see these models and this kind of concept on some of the biggest healthcare projects and some of the mega projects. But I think ideally we'll start to see that come down into kind of our more typical everyday jobs to where we better understand them before we actually get into them. I think the other side of it is you'll hear a lot in our industry this concept of moving to prefabrication and
Yeah.
actually even some more like manufacturing type ideas that are really big. So um, probably the most difficult place to try to build anything is on site out in the field where you've got weather conditions and delays and all kinds of other things that are happening. But if we can take some of those concepts and move them into more of a factory setting
Hmm.
where we do have kind of more defined processes that we follow, I think we're starting to see a lot more of that. I think that's probably one of the biggest opportunities that we've got right now. We talk a lot in the trades about the lack of skilled labor that we have
Oh yeah.
with so many kids these days going into to kids these days, aging myself. But so many people want to be in desk jobs and they want to be behind a computer doing those kinds of things, and we don't see as much interest of people wanting to be out in the field. They think of it as really difficult, tough work, and a lot of times because it is. So I think if we can move some of that offsite where we're starting to do that in more of a controlled setting, is going to be a really really big thing for the industry as a whole. Get people in conditions that are safer and better for them, better working environments, and then hopefully speed up the progress of the jobs once they're actually on site. So,
Yeah, it's interesting. We've been having a conversation recently as we're focused in on services, and this is, take construction as one example of that, but even
yeah.
with IT or data management or all these other places, everyone's looking for a way to productize their service, right?
Hmm.
Because
Okay.
you want to get greater return on investment
Yeah.
on not just the hour, but
Yeah.
potentially on something that could scale beyond the hour. So less cost in, more revenue, or more profit out.
Hmm.
And I think that's a good example. That prefab side of things is an opportunity for them to kind of basically be productizing what they used to quote unquote custom build
Yeah.
each time, and
Yeah.
now saying, you know what, that building and that building aren't that different, right?
Right. Yep.
What's inside is maybe a little different, size a little bit different, but effectively the walls are the same, the
Yeah.
foundation is the same. What if we didn't rethink this each time?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
fascinating. I think there's a huge opportunity there.
There definitely is, and some project types make more sense for it, right, than others. Like if you've got a multifamily project where you have a lot of units that are the same, if you have a hospital where you have a lot of units that are the same,
Yep.
we're even seeing it into. I mentioned education and higher education earlier, but a lot of schools and the buildings that are needed for schools are similar, and so we see a lot of where we may reuse similar floor plans and things like that, but we kind of change up the facade for the given area that the project's actually being built in. So yeah,
Yeah.
we're definitely
Yeah.
seeing more of it.
Okay, so I'm curious, now that you're on the inside of the technology side of things,
Yeah.
and even going back to your consulting days, where where are there areas that you think technology companies were chasing
Hmm.
opportunities to serve AEC, but were
Hmm.
maybe missing the mark, right? Maybe they were going after saying technology will solve all these problems for you, but in reality, it's like, you know what, a sticky note on a wall and a phone call to a subcontractor actually works better.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm throwing that out as is we often talk about technology is kind of the end all be all for all things,
Right.
but where did you see missteps in maybe the technology industry chasing things that were like, nah, or maybe just
Yeah.
2 degrees off?
Yeah. I think we see it's always like 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of a thing, but definitely it might be like 2 steps forward, 1.5 steps back sometimes in construction. But we deal with a lot of frontline people who are out in the field, like getting their hands dirty, and so technology a lot of times may be a little bit slower for them to adapt. And
Yeah,
I think a lot of the missteps maybe that I saw were things that work in typical technology industries, or for typical technology audiences, aren't necessarily the same things that work for contractors and how they operate and what they do. So it's been interesting to see sort of this combination of, there was a big push for a long time of, well, if we just bring in these SaaS founders and these SaaS people who understand SaaS software, it'll work. It'll work just like it's worked in every other industry that we've gone into. And we realized pretty quickly in construction that that's not always the case. It's
yeah,
definitely sort of a merging of those two, right? So it's getting, for us, going and sitting down with the contractors themselves that are out doing it and better understanding kind of how they operate. Um, Working from an iPad when you're sitting behind a desk is one thing, but when you're out in the weather and the elements, when the sun's blaring on the screen and you're trying to do the things you need to do, totally a different thing. So, I think for us, that's kind of been the biggest thing, is just trying to figure out how we bring those two things together so that we're really serving the people out in the field and making their lives better, not just necessarily kind of like trying to shove a software into what they do. So
we were working on a project recently that was dealing with evaluation of stuff inside of industrial environments, so like oil
mm,
grid, oil containers and things like that. Big
yeah,
big
yeah,
construction
yeah.
environments. And one of the things we were talking about is the fact that these guys are wearing big gloves because they're out on
Mhm,
and it's like, how do you touch the iPad when you've got massive gloves that
yeah,
are keeping you safe from the environment you're in? Which
yeah,
is interesting. I think what I hear there is there's a challenge both environmentally, right?
mhm,
So the context of, hey, we're out here in the workforce, we've got sun, we've got, like you said, weather, we've
yeah,
got mud, mess, whatever, in construction
yeah,
materials. And then on the other side of it, you have the challenge of, but we need the data,
mhm,
right?
yeah,
And so there is this a little bit of bifurcation of needs, if you will, of how do we get the data we need, which is scheduling, material, cost, equipment, people, etc.
Yeah.
Uh, when the the world is against us in some ways.
Yeah.
What are some ways that you've seen that be addressed or seen that be at least find a compromise in that?
Yeah, no, it's a huge deal. And I mean, when we talk about data, like to your, you mentioned that of like post-it notes, and it's right on. I mean, in some of these things we see tickets are written up on paper, and one of the key people on a project may have a binder full of paper documents that they're keeping. And so not exactly data that we can like leverage and use on the next project. So I think one of them is just simply trying to better understand how we can make technology work for those guys and trying to make them comfortable
Yeah.
using technology. I think for us, one of the biggest things too has been sort of this in construction. We tend to have a lot of sort of heroes on the job site where, like, as long as I do things my way, like I know that we can be successful. And I think in a way we've got some old school thinking that way where we tend to be a little bit risk adverse. We tend to be afraid of
Mhm.
change. We tend to be afraid of being wrong or messing something up. And so I think what we're really starting to see, and I think hopefully one of the biggest changes that's happening in our industry, at least, is that the more we accept change, the more we accept risk, the more we accept being wrong and being okay with that and kind of moving on. I think people are now starting to adapt things and adopt new ways of doing things faster. And so, we start to see some of the old guys where you put an iPad in their hand and they start working with it. And if we approach it the right way and we've done it well, where they're comfortable using it, and they can quickly kind of see a few wins. And I think that's where we can really start to bridge that gap, where if we can start to get them into it, get them comfortable with it, if we can mirror the ways that they operate more closely, where they're more comfortable just day one, then I think all of a sudden, I mean, they can see, if they see that it's going to be efficient, that it's going to work well, they'll do it. And if we can start to get them to capture it in a way that we can actually get data out of it, I mean, that's kind of the goal, I think, for everybody. So we spend a lot of time. I talk about a lot of a customer of ours where they put in fire protection systems throughout these giant, massive buildings, and when they were estimating projects, they did it all by hand. They would use highlighters, and they have these big sets of blueprints that, you don't know how many trees were wasted printing these things off. And they'd go through and they retrace all these things by hand. And so we literally took video of kind of how they were operating, what they were doing, and then we went back and we really sort of configured certain things behind the scenes within our platform to mirror exactly how they were operating. And so
Yeah.
now all of a sudden we said, hey, when you're doing this line with a highlighter, this is how you would do it within Stack. They could kind of connect those two things a little quicker. And then it doesn't take them nearly as long to be able to say, hey, okay, I might actually be able to do that. And then once they start doing it, all of a sudden they're way faster. We're collecting data. We're able to kind of like, really kind of move things forward a little faster, which is great. So,
Well, what I love about that too is that, I mean, the name of the podcast, right? People, a product.
yeah.
It focuses is on the fact that oftentimes, especially in this industry or more traditional industries, whatever you
Hmm.
want to call that as,
Yeah. Yeah.
they view technology as a threat, right? And so
Right.
well, is that thing going to take my job, right? Like I've
Hmm.
been doing it this way for forever, and it's not to say that like it is the best way to do it, but I just don't want someone else to do it a different way because I have purpose, I have meaning, I have value
Yeah.
because I can write it down the way that I used to. And you introducing a way that says, no, we see you, we hear you,
Hmm.
we're not trying to scare you. This is going to feel familiar is a brilliant way to approach designing or building a product that actually meets the customer where they're at. And
Yeah.
then as you make those little micro steps as iterations
Yeah.
inside the product where they're at, they're like, oh, okay, well, that's just a little change, no big deal.
Yeah.
Instead
Right.
of, oh, you're asking me to work with it a different way and
Yep.
using it a different tool. I don't want to do that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. No, and it's, a lot of that like I said, kind of goes back to that hero syndrome kind of thing where it's like, if I can control everything, like that's how I'm most valuable. And I think that's where I'm able to actually bridge a little bit of what we did in consulting and trying to help people understand
Mm,
like the purpose of the organization versus like, I just want to get this job done and I want to control this job. So if you can kind of help the people in the front lines understand how what they're doing isn't just about this particular job, but rather sort of what we're doing as an organization to make the world better. Now, all of a sudden, like what I hold tight to and what's most important and what makes me the hero isn't necessarily like this collection of documents that I keep under my arm, but
Yes.
it's like, hey, if we can really do this well, we can move to the next project, we can grow the next generation, and we're all doing something that's actually making the world a better place. I think that's a totally different view and sort of kind of gets people hopefully to open up a little bit, and kind of let go maybe of some of the things that they used to hold tight to, which is great. So
I love it.
yeah,
Well, okay, well, I want to wrap up because I want to land the plane a little bit here. This is fascinating
yeah,
because we covered a lot of ground already.
yeah, yeah.
So what's something as you're looking ahead, whether
Mhm.
it's a problem to be fixed or a, something that's happening in front of us right now? We teased it AI, we talked
Yeah,
a little about AR and,
yeah,
whatever. Is there something, whether it's in technology or the construction industry at large, what's something
yeah.
you're excited about right now? What's getting you pumped?
Honestly, it's funny. We all, like, especially in tech, I think we go into the new year and everybody's kind of going, what's the big theme for the year and those kinds of things.
Sure.
So I'm
Yeah.
always kind of thinking from those perspectives. But I think for me, beyond there's a ton of great things, really cool things happening with AI, and a lot of really great technology things that are happening everywhere. I think for me personally, for our industry, it's this, in all, hopefully a lot of other traditional kind of industries. I think sort of this mindset shift. We tend to be kind of a very old school, old white guy kind of a place, and I think for us trying to attract people, I mean, it's interesting. You have kids who are super excited about construction when they're growing up and they're wearing hard hats and doing all these things, but then somehow we kind of lose that excitement as they get older and they find other things that they want to go into. And so for me, it's just trying to figure out how do we keep this industry really, really exciting. And I think we're starting to see this shift where we're bringing in, more females to the industry, and we're bringing in people of color, and this whole diversity thing where we're actually getting to this place where we're getting the best thought, not just our same old thought. And so for me, it's continuing to kind of see that evolve, see things that are happening from that standpoint, and really kind of seeing a mindset sort of shift in the industry. I think that's probably the single most exciting thing for me, hands down. So we're trying to recruit from everywhere. If we can get more people excited about construction, get more people into the industry, get them the technologies they need. Those are the things I think have me most excited right now for sure.
That's it's a perfect response. I love the idea that not only getting people excited about, like, it can be really exciting work,
Yeah.
and
100%.
also how do we introduce it to maybe people that traditionally don't get exposure to the opportunity? That's
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's awesome. I mean, we do really great things. We build the coolest buildings. We build the coolest structures. People see the things that we do every day. They're there. They're there for usually a really long time. So yeah, no, hopefully we can get more people excited and into this industry. We need all the help, all the thought that we can get.
Awesome, awesome. Well, Aaron, I want to roll out the red carpet for you. Tell people a little bit more about where they can learn more about what you're working on, what
Yeah.
Stack's working on, where they can find out more about you.
Yeah, always love talking about Stack, what we do, what's happening in the industry. So people are welcome to reach out to me anytime. Aaron A. Henderson at stackct.com. You can go to stackct.com and kind of see a little bit of what we do. But I'm always here. Anything that people are doing with technology or any way I can help, super excited to do that. So reach out anytime.
Awesome. Well, I always like to end with saying thank you because honestly, I think what I get the pleasure to talk to lots of people in different industries and different focuses, and one of the reasons I love this being called people of product and not just like how to build technology is the
Yeah.
fact that it's always a human being behind the intentional work to make either our industries better, our companies better, people's lives better. And so, thank you for the intentional work that you're doing because I think it's really important, and the world should say thank you back every once in a while. So, thank you for the work that you're doing.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much, George.
People of Product is brought to you by Crema, a design consultancy that helps forward-thinking leaders discover, understand, and execute on their greatest opportunities. Learn more at crema.us.